Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Dave Moorfield, the Director of Flight Operations for Gates Aerospace Institute. Today we're going to be briefing the Flight Operations Manual. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to kind of hand off between myself, Charles Ellis, and Blake Neal, briefing different parts of this. I want to welcome everybody again to the beginning of a new year. We're excited to have everybody back in the classroom. We got great things planned, Drone Olympics, other things, other events that we'll be doing. Blake and Charles will be coming out to the school to fly with you guys as well, so we're really excited about all the opportunities we have planned for us with new drones, new curriculum. So great things happening, and we want to kick it off this year with the brief for the Flight Operations Manual. So that's what we're going to get started with. The hierarchy. So if you look at how we fly, okay, CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations. That's where our governing body is for anything that's flying in the air. And we have to adhere to that. So beyond that, we kind of go down and we go through the ERA Flight Operations Manual, and then we get down to the Gates Aerospace Institute Flight Operations Manual. Every year we do a stand board to make sure that everything we're doing is in accordance with what's going on with the latest CFRs and with the Embry-Riddle FOM to make sure we're within those guidelines. And we promulgate that out to the schools to make sure everybody understands how that's done. That's what this is about. We're going to have you do this brief before you guys start flying, and then before you start flying, you're also going to be doing the trust. The trust certificate is going to allow you to do hobbyist flying, but also to allow us to fly the drones out in the classroom setting. Okay? Your SOP, our SOP is for you to use as well. The SOP is a little bit more restrictive, and your further restrictions can be to your local FOM. So that's kind of the hierarchy, the FOM, the SOP, and then your local FOM. Your local FOM cannot be any looser than what we do as guidelines as far as our FOM. You can be more restrictive, and that's the purpose of that, to keep you safe, because there may be things in your school that you have to be aware of that don't allow you to do the things that we have at other schools. So that's why your FOM can be more restrictive, and a lot of times will be more restrictive. Okay. Why are we making me learn this stuff? Well, think about it. As professional aviators, which we're trying to train you guys all to be professional aviators, you want to fly like a professional. That's what this is about. All professionals have guidelines they use, whether you're talking about the drone industry, the airline industry, everybody uses professional guidelines. And that's what we're trying to instill that professionalism in everybody that takes our courses. Okay? Because no matter what you fly, we do it professionally. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. Instill professionalism into you. All right, this FOM, official version. This was a FOM that we did last year. We're going to have another stand board this year. There'll be some updates. So once we do that, we'll promulgate that through email and through some changes to the instructors and make sure they brief that. Sanctioned by a stand board. Stand board is usually meets every year, and it's a combination of about 4 or 5 different instructors and our stand board members here. Compliance is mandatory, okay? This is something that you have to fly by. You can't go any looser than this. You can't go outside the bounds of this. This is for your own safety and the good of the program. Want to make sure everybody is in compliance with the FOM. Will definitely change. It does change because the drone industry is changing. It's growing. It's maturing. As it grows and matures, we have to change with it. So that's one of the things that happens. We make sure every year at the stand board that everything we do is in accordance with the latest changes under the guides of the Code of Federal Regulations and 14 CFR. Completed open book test is a portion of your license to fly ERA aircraft. You have to get that open book test completed. You as a student get a 95. For the instructors, it has to be 100%. Open book corrected to 100%. Not a big lift, but we want to make sure everybody understands the material and everything in there. That's important for us to make sure you guys are flying properly. All right, here's the sections, the policies. General administration, UAS flight crew, operation procedures, safety, emergency procedures and equipment, currency and training, battery maintenance, security procedures, program forms, definitions, acronyms, and SOP Annex UAS aircraft SOP. Before we go any further, I'm going to just kind of brief you quick. You guys see the drones up here. We got the Yanafi AI, we got our Yanafis, and we've got the Disco, and then we've got the Skydios. Sorry about that. So these are the drones that we are going to be using. There's a little bit of a change. Everybody knows the DJI has been an issue with other schools. So now what we're doing is we're trying to use the Skydio and the ANAFIs and the ANAFI AI to complement what we're doing. The fleet's going to change over. It's going to be a long changeover process because the cost of these is much higher than the DJI products. But I want you all to understand that these will be the fleet going forward. So we'll get very comfortable flying these, and we want to make sure you guys are flying them properly. Okay, going back to the FOM brief, revision and highlights. This is how we do our changes. So when we brief this, if there's any changes that come out from the stand board, this is where you'll find all the changes. Policy: teachers and instructors responsible to ensure each student is thoroughly familiar with local FOMs, locally created FOMs, not to supersede the requirements of the GAI FOM. So again, your local FOM could be more restrictive, but it cannot be any looser than what we do here at Embry-Riddle, okay? And that's why those local FOMs are there. Again, changes to the manual, program change form, change 45. If you have something that you want to change, if there's something that you feel is urgent, we need to know that as soon as possible. Because there may be things that have changed that we weren't aware of. So we depend on you guys to be our ears and eyes as well. You're part of the program, you're part of the safety of this program. We want to make sure you guys understand that that's important to us and you guys have a voice. Okay? Keywords: will and shall. Those denote mandatory, okay? If something in that FOM says will or shall, that is a mandatory thing you must comply with. Should, preferred but not mandatory. If something in there says should, that means it's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended. May suggest is a suggested, so if we say something along the lines of may cause injury or may allow you to do something, that is something that's suggested, so pay heed to that, okay? Warnings could result in serious injury or death. If there's a warning, make sure you're paying attention to that. There's a lot of things that can happen with drones. Even though they're small, they can still hurt and kill. So be very careful with that when you see that warning. Caution: results in damage to equipment. That is something that's important to us. We want to make sure that these drones last us for a long time, so we want to make sure we're flying them in a safe manner that allows us to reuse them every year. So that's one of the most important things when we do this, making sure you adhere to all the cautions, notes, and warnings. Note essential to emphasize. So if there's a note on there, it may not cause damage, it may not cause injury, but it's something that's important that you want to make sure that you're adhering to, because that could be something that talks about rules. It could be something that talks about the equipment itself and how best to use it. Something that's really important to this equipment, okay? This is fragile stuff and it's very expensive. Keywords. Okay, will and shall indicated a mandatory requirement we just talked about. Should, normally used to indicate preferred or not mandatory method of accomplishment. And may indicates an acceptable or suggested means of accomplishment. Okay, land as soon as possible. Aircraft shall be landed in the nearest site to which the safe landing can be made. Land as soon as possible, this is used quite often in aviation. It deals with the aircraft itself. So if there's an issue with the aircraft, a lot of times you want to land as soon as possible, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that that aircraft is usable again. If we land as soon as possible before the battery goes out, we don't have to worry about trying to replace the rotor blades. We don't have to try to replacing one of the legs. That's why land as soon as possible is important. Land immediately. Aircraft shall be landed in an immediate point in time unless risk of serious injury or damage to the property. So land immediately could be something where if you're over trees, even if you're over trees, you need to get that drone down, okay? That's very important. It could be something where it causes bodily injury if you're not careful, okay? Possible loss of the aircraft is justified, and then serious injury requires hospitalization or suffered loss of consciousness, okay? So that's important. Serious injury requires hospitalization or suffered loss of consciousness. We don't want anybody to get hurt. So when we're flying these drones, please, please, please be very careful when you're doing that. Again, they look small, but if this thing's coming at you about 30, 40 miles an hour, it's going to hurt. And it could actually cut you and possibly kill you. Okay, flight crew member or flight personnel. Any person, teacher, student, or other who is associated with given flight operations. You're part of that flight crew. And everybody in that flight crew is responsible for safety. So if you see something, say something. If somebody's walking into the path while you're doing flight operations, you need to halt those flight operations. Make sure everybody's safe. And everybody out there has a portion that's safety. Okay? Deviations are authorized in the interest of safety. So if there's something that happens and you have to deviate outside the lines of what's acceptable. And I'll give you an example. If somehow the aircraft or something comes into your flight path and you have to go above what your restricted altitude is for a momentary lapse, to bring that aircraft back down, that's okay. You're allowed to deviate, but you need to get that aircraft back down as soon as possible. You're doing that in the interest of safety. If that does happen, though, you need to let us know as soon as possible. If any of these things happen, you need to let myself, Charles, or Blake know as soon as possible. So this way we can go ahead and we can make sure that there's no repercussions to you or the school. Okay? Local permit deviations, waivers are possible, but must be approved by GE Executive Director, okay? So if there's something that needs to be, if you have some sort of deviation you're trying to get or waiver, we need to know that. We'll look at it, we'll evaluate it, and we'll see if that's something that we can actually push forward. Okay, minimum crew, I'm going to turn this over right now to Charles. Charles is going to brief the minimum crew and the rest of the slides going forward.
So we're going to talk about minimum crew, and as Mr. Moorfield was talking about, all of our drones here in front of us, we have the Parrot Anafi AI. Some of us have been calling it the AI. We have our classic Anafi, the Disco Ag, and the Skydio 2 Plus. And as you can see across the board, we have a minimum crew of 2 for all of our drones in our fleet, and we're going to keep it that way. Now, minimum crew doesn't mean it's minimum. You can have more students in a crew than 2. But at a minimum, if you're outside flying our aircraft, we need to have 2 crew members at all times. Note, ERU aircraft and missions can only be crewed by current and qualified ERU students unless otherwise approved by the GAI UAS program director on a case-by-case basis. So, what does it mean to be current and qualified? First step is FOM, having the test done, and secondly, have the trust. The ERU instructor has different qualifications that they have to uphold to as well. One is FOM open book test, just the same as the students, and then secondly, they're going to have their remote piloting command certificate through the FAA, along with their trust as well. Note, in place of the rule set formally referred to in this FOM as Part 101, the reader may see the phrase the exception. This is to maintain continuity with the exception for limited recreation operations of manned aircraft. So just to add a little bit more confusion to it, we used to talk about Part 101, hobbyists, then the FAA started calling them the exception, and now the exception has turned into the recreational pilot. So if you hear any of those 3 terms, we're talking about flying for fun, flying without a commercial purpose. So if you hear about the exception, recreation, this is where the trust falls into the realm of things. So here at Riddle, we are all flying under the educational realm. We're flying under Part 101, the hobbyist, the exception. We have that mindset. But we hold our teachers to a higher standard of having that Part 107, that RPIC certificate, because we want to build rigor. Note, for recreational flight operations, an Embry-Riddle instructor must be physically present at the flight operation. This means you cannot take a drone out, check it out to students, or let them go outside and fly on their own without an instructor present. Instructor must be present at all times. The term RPIC, or Remote Pilot Command, shall be used to mean all references to credentialed GAI UAS instructors. So if we talk about the RPIC, this moving forward, we're talking about the instructor in the classroom. And in the definition is the person who holds the FAA Remote Pilot Certificate with an SUAS rating, a Small Unmanned Aircraft Systems rating. Crew members, RPIC qualification requirements. Be a GAI high school, so in order to fly and become if you're a student, in order to use our aircraft and fly it, you have to be a high school student in a UAS program. UAS for agricultural operations, AS 220, 222, 235, 237. Students currently enrolled in one of these courses and who has possessed an FAA-issued RPIC with an SUAS rating. That's the only way you can become an RPIC. So if a student did not participate in dual enrollment in one of these courses their senior year, but they have their RPIC and they want to help out and fly the aircraft on the weekends or during that class period with the younger classmen, no bueno. No can do. They have to be in the course and with an SUAS rating. That's the only way they can become an RPIC. Pathways to becoming flight crew. 1, receive the FOM briefing. That's the first thing we got to do first and foremost. It's 90% for the students, 100% for the instructors. I passed the open book test. Second thing we're going to do is receive the systems brief for the airframe to be flown. So we have individual tailored briefings for each of the aircraft, from the ones we have here, the Anafis and the Parrot products, to the Skydio products. Once they receive the systems briefing, you pass the systems test with a minimum score of 70. This is not open book, but easy. And then you have to go through the FAA and pass the recreational UAS safety test. That's what it stands for. Trust the recreational UAS safety test. Trust. We are actually a provided vendor for this. You can go to Gates Aerospace webpage through Embry-Riddle, and on the left-hand side we have our trust portal. If not, you can easily search Google FAA UAS Trust, and it will pull up a list of all the vendors, and you will see Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in that list. You can go through there. It is completely free. It's all online. Upon completion, you will get a certificate. That certificate you have to hold on to. For the students, this is a tip for the teachers. Teachers need to, I would make a copy and hold on to those trust certificates. If a trust certificate is lost, misplaced, gone, or anyone here, even though we're provider and vendors, any of the vendors, we cannot reproduce that certificate. It is up to the user to hold on to it. The only thing that we get are the actual certificate numbers that we send on to the FAA, send off to the FAA so that they know that they are valid. But we do not keep records, and we cannot pull records or create a new certificate based off of an old record. FAA's guidance on this, I asked. There were several people who found themselves in the situation. I was simply told, well, it's a good time for them to go back through the course again to get it as a refresher and get a new certificate. So hold on to it, put it digitally in a file somewhere. If you're a teacher and you're getting all the ones for the students, put them in a file, download them, put them in a binder, what have you. You have to have this on you when you go fly in the National Airspace System. All right, crew members. So crew members that we need outside, or some of the ones that we talk about in the FOM, team lead. Team leads are charged with the RPIC as responsible for the safe and conduct of a single UAS. The team lead can hold up to 2 positions on the crew. Most often, they are the VO as well as the team lead. They can work both ways, while the other person is going to be the PMTC, or the person manipulating the controls. That's someone else other than the RPIC. They're controlling the flight of the SUAS. They're supervised by the RPIC or the team lead. The VO is the third member. It can also be the team lead. They assist the RPIC and the PMTC to see and avoid other air traffic and objects, flight hazards, if you will. They must be looking at the aircraft or its environment 100% of the time. They're often also the team lead. When we go out and fly with students, I usually break them up into groups of 4 or 5. You have a team lead, you have a PMTC, and I usually have someone running checklists and also being a VO, while the other member and the other 2 members are VOs. They just simply there to observe and make sure we don't have any incoming aircraft, birds, weather, winds picking up, that sort of thing. Warning. During an abnormal or emergency situation, the RPIC should always fly the aircraft. Absolutely true. Anytime an emergency or abnormal situation arises, the RPIC takes over. This is going to be the instructor on most cases. So the instructor needs to be able to take over and land the aircraft or deal with the emergency or situation. Max number of aircrafts aloft. Simultaneous operations for parts 107 and 101 are allowed as long as it applies to outdoor. Part 107 says that we're allowed to have 1 FAA RPIC. You have 1 RPIC to a maximum of 3. That's what we say. If you have a Part 107, you have 1 RPIC to 3 drones in the air. The exception, maximum number is 3. Simultaneous Part 107 and recreational operators, the max number of aircraft is 3. So the magic number is 3. Now remember, we are operating, and you're flying out in the classroom, outside for the class period, we are operating under the recreation, the hobbyist, the exception, whatever you want to call us. We're operating recreationally, but there are times where an instructor can be asked to perform certain activities using that RPIC certificate they have in their pocket. That is working for hire and making money. That is doing something for something, quid pro quo. If the instructor is going to, let's say, been asked by the administration to take photos, video of, let's say it's a class picture for the end of the year. You want to take everybody's on the football field, they want to take a big picture, and it says, 25 or 24 in the picture, everyone's laid out. That's great. You need to make sure that you're doing 107. You say I'm doing a commercial flight, because they can put that in a yearbook, make money off of it for the school. Now it becomes a commercial operation. We're not educating students, you're doing something for somebody. So in those situations where you are actually flying under Part 107 on the RPIC, using the RPIC certificate, is one aircraft, one RPIC. Otherwise, we are under our FOM, where we say you can have up to 3 aircraft at once. Flight rules. Visual line of sight, or VLOS. All flights shall be flown within visual line of sight. That is a mandatory requirement. Shall, meaning mandatory. What is line of sight? Visual line of sight depends on the size of the aircraft. For example, if you take the Paradinofi versus Disco, as the FAA defines visual line of sight, we have to determine the speed, direction, altitude, and attitude of the aircraft, all with our eyes, unaided eyes. Glasses are not considered aids. Something as small as an Anofi is going to be harder to see at a quarter of a mile versus something larger such as this. So visual line of sight can move in perspective depending on the size of your aircraft. But you need to determine the speed, altitude, heading, and direction of the aircraft at all times. If you cannot, you are not within visual line of sight. Weather considerations: ceilings greater than, equal to 500 feet above the planned mission maximum altitude, and visibility needs to be greater than equal or greater than 3 miles of visibility, and that goes right back to the actual FAA weather limitations. Weather considerations: outdoor flight operations shall not be conducted with audible thunder, visible rain, and winds. You see your specific airframe is detailed in the annex. So in the back of the FOM, we have an annex where we talk about each of the aircraft and what winds they can sustain and what wind limitations the manufacturer and what we've put on there. So audible thunder and visible rain. Moisture, not a friend for electronics. Thunder, we don't want to get electrocuted. We're not trying to get struck down. So any of those situations, outdoor flight shall not be conducted. Performance data, battery reserves. So minimum battery reserves after landing is 20%. Flights are planned to land within greater than 30. If indications of higher than expected battery drain, then you shall terminate the flight. Always keep an eye, even as the PMTC, keep an eye on your battery. Yes, you're watching the aircraft, you're doing visual line of sight. You're allowed to look down every now and again and check your battery. If not, the team lead should ask every now and again, what's your battery level? Where are we at? At 30%, you should start considering about returning to home and getting back towards closer to the landing and takeoff position. At 30, if you're around a little bit above 30, start heading back. If you're at 30, you're definitely heading back home. Stop what you're doing. If you get down below that and you missed it, definitely start bringing it back. At 20, you should be on the ground. Don't let it drop below 20. It's the nature of these batteries, these lithium polymer batteries. The cool thing about lithium polymer is that they have a constant voltage, amperage, which is great, but then they don't slowly die. They knee off really, really hard. So that means you can go from 100% of full functioning battery to absolute zero like that. And if the drone's at 200 feet, then it falls, and now we have a broken aircraft. So we want to keep you flying and keep us from working on aircraft. So at 20%, it should be on the ground. Now let's say you're not at the takeoff landing location at 20%. If you're in a suitable area where you can land it in the grass, it's just further away, then land it. Land it as soon as possible. It goes back to the definitions in the beginning of the PowerPoint. Land as soon as possible, as land as practical, so that You don't damage the drone. What's the worst on you? You got to go walk 100 yards to go pick up the aircraft. If indications are you see battery drain happening a lot quicker than normal, if you're usually getting 30-minute flight time out of a battery, 25 minutes, 20 minutes, and next thing you know, it's like, oh, we've only been flying this thing for like 5-10 minutes and we're already at like 30% or 40%. That's not right. That's where you need to land as soon as possible. You got to terminate that flight because that could lead to the aircraft falling out of the sky. Landing requirements. If for any reason the GUI shows 20, land as soon as possible, just cover that. For any reason the GUI shows 10, land immediately, but do not sacrifice the aircraft. Do not do that. We're not losing aircraft today. 3.5, site requirements. Small unmanned aircraft system flights should, to the greatest extent possible, be conducted over sites that are unpopulated, uninhibited. VTOL aircraft, takeoff non-essential person within 10 feet of the aircraft, should not be flown over 250 feet above ground level unless required by the curriculum goals and the mission requirements, shall not exceed 400. So let's cover all that. Flights should be, to the greatest extent possible, not over unpopulated, uninhabited. Well, we're at a school. Obviously it's populated, and obviously there's people below us. What does this mean? It means if we're flying on the football field or over the practice field, and let's say we're flying over the football field with a track around it. We're flying, all of a sudden here comes the gym class, and they're flying around they're running on the track. You shouldn't be flying over top of the people at all. That's a big rule breaker. If you are asked to do some other events where you are flying around people, you don't want to fly over the general public. There are certain rules that you can do this under Part 107, but under our FOM we do not fly over them unless absolutely necessary. And that's necessary means there's an emergency situation or some reason to get the aircraft back and you have to transition over people, then do so. VTOL aircraft, that's vertical takeoff and land, such as all of these except the disco here. Stand at least 10 feet from the aircraft before taking off. We do not fly over 250 feet above the ground unless it's required by the goals or the missions. Typically, all of our flight's going to be done within 100 feet of the ground or even 50 feet of the ground. Some of the data processing for 235, I would see myself maybe getting in the 150 range. And for the 237, yes, we may need to go above this if I'm making a video of the campus and getting these large wide-angle shots. But no matter what, we shall never exceed 400 feet. This has to be set forth and approved by the instructor beforehand. Reference the FAA UAS facilities maps. So, if an aerodrome manager or a control tower exists, then LANCE approval is required. How do we get LANCE? What is LANCE? LANCE is the authorization when we're inside class, inside airspace that's not class G or E. So we're talking B, C, D airspace. We need to have approval to fly within that airspace because that airspace goes to the ground, and if we're 1 foot off the ground, we're inside their airspace, we need to have permission to be in their airspace. LANCE is an automated app-based notification system where I can put in my information, send it off, I get a text message back almost immediately saying, I have approval, here's your number, and you're allowed to go fly for that period of time. The tower knows you're there, everything's copacetic. If you are outside of these, of the area in the facilities maps where there is no bubble or no height restrictions, then you don't need LANCE approval. You're in Class G airspace and you can fly just as a recreational. You take it off outside, no problem. Now, how do we get LANCE approval? What are some of the apps? Aloft is the go-to one right now that we like a lot. The one in the past we used to use was Air Maps, but they have now since went out of business and sold off, and they're no longer providing LANCE notifications. So Aloft is a good one. No outdoor unenclosed flight shall be conducted unless prior LANCE authorization is granted for being conducted in Class G airspace. just stated. Flight operations requirements. So let's go back over what we just talked about. SUAS shall not be flown over 200 feet AGL, above ground level, and shall not exceed 400 feet AGL. SUAS shall maintain cloud separation of 500 feet below and 2,000 feet horizontally from a cloud. SUAS shall not be flown faster than a ground speed of 87 knots or 100 miles per hour. SUAS shall not be intentionally flown over personnel or non-participating in operations. SUAS shall always give way to manned aircraft. And SUAS shall not be operated after sunset or before sunrise unless approved by the Director of Flight Operations, also known as Dave Moorfield. Next, I'm going to hand it off to Blake Neal, our STEM Outreach Coordinator, and have him talk about operations and batteries and FRIAs.
All right, we're going to keep moving on in operations here. So any controlled airspace, that is Class B, Class C, or Class D airspace, or within the Class E aerodrome airspace, operations are prohibited unless you have prior LANC approval. Now here's a good little piece of information here. Camera use. In our FOM, we are saying that cameras shall not observe individuals or property of individuals who are unwilling or unknowing. So that's just good practice. It's good privacy practice. We're not trying to introduce any privacy concerns at our schools. Keep the camera pointed at what you need to do for your operation in your class, and don't be spying on people. All right, note, mission products that only require periodic updating, such as site surveys, but not flight risk assessments, which is also known as the FRAT, can be used multiple times to fulfill pre-flight planning requirements. So what this means is site surveys, yes, you can reuse the site surveys because the information most of the time will not change. The airport airspace information, that's usually the same unless there's some kind of overhaul on the airport. But however, the FRAT does change because weather changes, and weather is a big part of the FRAT. Crew rest. You know, one day you might have great rest, and the next day your crew is groggy. So that does change. You have to fill that out every time you go out to fly. But if you're flying at the same site, yes, by all means, use the same site survey. All right, prior to flight, the RPIC is responsible for the following: a site survey, the FRAT, and then a crew brief. So the crew brief consists of the crew roles and the responsibilities, mission and the plan of execution. So that's what you're actually going to be doing with the drone, the operating and weather conditions, the site survey brief, crew roles and emergency procedures, and then the overall FRAT score. Warning, always place the remote control on the ground before anyone reaches into an aircraft to turn off the battery. This is a great, a good practice that we have in our FOM. Put that controller down either on the ground or a table before anyone approaches a hot drone. This is so that in the event that the PMC accidentally hits a button, that takeoff button, or they move the sticks in a certain way and the drone takes off, we don't want anybody getting a face full of drone. It's just for everyone's safety. Another warning here, never reach into the propeller arc of an aircraft while the propellers are in motion. Pretty straightforward, but I've seen some incidents where people get lacerations. These propellers will cut you. And of course, never put your face above a UAS and only use one hand whenever possible. Again, we have a training video on this. It's called Face Full of Drone. Never go like this over a drone, whether it's on or not. It's just good practice. Warning, always remove the propellers from the aircraft prior to troubleshooting any system or component on that aircraft. So all of our aircraft here, with the exception of the Skydio, actually have twist lock. This one has a screw that you have to take off. But again, it's good practice to take the propellers off if you have any kind of issue that you're trying to troubleshoot, if you have any motor problems. It's kind of like taking the tires off of a car before you test anything. So that way, if something goes haywire, the drone's not just going to take off and just keep going. You won't have any props on, so it won't be able to hurt anybody or just take off. All right, takeoff, landings, and recovery. Manual rotary wing takeoffs may be conducted when an automatic takeoff would be less stable than a manual takeoff, or for training. So what this means, obviously, if we want to train a manual takeoff, by all means, that's totally fine. Or if it's better to automatic takeoff, if it's unstable for whatever reason, whether it's just a little bit too windy on the ground, it's just easier to take off manually. That's what we mean by that. All right, caution. Do not fly our aircraft if the propellers are excessively worn, chipped, or broken. Now, obviously, this is an extreme case, and that would cause the drone probably to not even take off in the first place, but good practice. This is in our checklist as well, to check the condition of the props before you take off each sortie that you take off, because most of the time props actually get damaged when they're on the ground. So it's just good practice before you turn the drone on to verify the conditions of the props and make sure that they are connected to the drone securely. Caution: if a battery is swollen, leaking, damaged, or deformed, do not attempt to use or charge. Batteries that were involved in any crash should not be used again until we check it off here at the office. Send us an email, ship it back to us, have your regional manager look at it. If we deem that it's safe, then you can keep using it, or we'll just issue a new battery to your school. Now, if the battery is not in long-term storage, this is something that all these batteries will do. They'll drain themselves to storage mode. For whatever reason, if they're not in storage mode or kept in storage mode, then they should be cycled at least twice a month. This is good practice for lithium batteries. It helps with the wear and tear on the batteries and let them last longer. All right, remote ID and FRIA. This is the biggest change going on right now in the UAS industry and also our FOM. Remote ID. All of these two aircraft right here, they broadcast standard remote ID. These two aircraft do not broadcast any remote ID. So we're just going to dive right in. If an aircraft does not broadcast remote ID, the UAS shall not be operated within the national airspace system unless it's within a FRIA. Remote ID cannot be turned off. This is laid forth by the FAA, and then we're extending that in our FOM. And again, the standard remote ID drones in our fleet are the Skydio 2 Plus and the Parrot Anafi AI. Any custom-built drones that you may have at your school does not broadcast standard remote ID without a broadcast module. All right, so what is a FRIA? A FRIA is a FAA-recognized identification area, and it is defined. It is a defined geographic area where drones can be flown without remote ID equipment. Both the drone and the pilot must be located within the FRIA boundaries throughout the operations, and in addition, the pilot of the drone must be able to see it at all times through the duration of the flight. So that's our VLOS operations rules. All right, so our FRIA site applications, we're leaving this up to the instructor at the school. You are the responsible person for your school. We cannot apply for you, one, because it contains a lot of sensitive information, and you are the point of contact, so you need to be able to put in your personal information and be responsible for this FRIA application. Now, you can apply for a FRIA in the FAA Drone Zone. Just Google FAA Drone Zone, get yourself an account, sign up, and it's pretty simple. There's a big button that says FRIA application. You go in there and start applying for it over your school. Make sure that you use the polygon feature, not the radius. Use the polygon feature in there, and to the best of your ability, keep the polygon over only where you will be operating the drone. Do not put the polygon over parking lots, roads, any other public areas, common areas, because that will just be an automatic denial by the FAA. Now, we are working very hard here to try and get some training out to you guys on exactly how to do this. Charles already has some slides put together. They are available on the UAS resource page. We plan on making a training video here within the next few weeks and pushing that out. That will be on the UAS resource page. There'll be a link to that on our YouTube page. We will talk about it in the future, and that way you guys will be able to apply for a FRIA and get it successfully approved. All right, another note. If the drone is equipped with standard remote ID, it may not be disabled or shut off while flying in a FRIA site. So what this means is if you happen to be flying a NAFI AI at your school and you have a FRIA at your school as well, the FRIA does not replace the need for remote ID. The FAA and us are saying you still need to have the remote ID broadcasting on your drone, even if you're operating at the FRIA site. The FRIA just allows you to fly without standard remote ID if you do not have a drone that broadcasts. All right, last point on FRIA I want to touch on. If your school's fleet contains any other aircraft other than the Skydio 2 Plus or the NAFI AI, then a FRIA shall be obtained for the area of operation at the school. And the UAS that do not broadcast shall not be flown until FRIA application is approved. So if these two drones, the Skydio 2 Plus and the Parrot Anafi AI, are the only two drones that you have in your fleet at your school, you are good to go. They broadcast standard remote ID. They do not need to be flown within a FRIA zone, and you're fine. If you have a custom drone, one of these or one of these drones, they do not broadcast standard remote ID. If you do not have a remote ID broadcast module, then you must apply for a FRIA site, and you cannot fly those drones until that is approved. Otherwise, you are flat out breaking Part 89 remote ID requirements.
All right, so I want to thank everybody for paying attention for this brief. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know there's a lot of information we put out to everybody, but we want to make sure that everybody's flying safe. They're doing it in accordance with the FOM. Charles and Blake and myself are here to answer any questions you guys have. Feel free to reach out to us at any time, and we want everybody to have fun and fly safely. So with that, have a great day, and hopefully we'll be out in your area sometime soon to help you fly and give you a bad dad joke. Have a great day, everybody.